I'm annoyed that this show is good enough that I actually have to talk about Star Wars. It's probably been a bit annoying for Star Wars fans how much I've kind of dismissed the franchise over the years, but I also feel like you cannot blame me entirely. Star Wars has had problems for literally decades now, and I'm not trying to discount the prequel trilogy. I know that absolutely has its fans, and in my opinion is well above a lot of the Star Wars content we've gotten in recent years. No question. This shirt blends in too much. Now I look like I'm in the Empire. But I hope it's never come across that I don't think there is potential in the Star Wars universe, because sci fantasy as a genre, if you look at a video I just put out the other day, has basically more potential than hardcore science fiction or fantasy in the way that it can blend and play with themes from both the imaginative fantastical side and the speculative, like, theorizing side. And I think Star Wars has done that really well in the past. And there is even a trend of sci fantasy being just as political as sci-fi tends to be, while also being able to bury it under more skinning with the theatrical, fantastical elements. And Star Wars, when it kicked off, did that magnificently. It's well known that George Lucas was commentating on Imperial America when he made, the original trilogy. It became a big theme he wanted to explore.
When I did it, they were exactly. So were you thinking of that at the time? So it was a very anti-authoritarian, very kind of 60s against the man kind of thing, nested deep inside of fantasy.
Or a colonial, we're fighting the largest empire in the world. Right?
There's been politics in Star Wars from the start. At least there was, until it was bought by Disney.
All right, now get out there and make me some goddamn money.
And Disney has had so many problems with their treatment of this franchise, and I'm not going to rehash them here because it would not just be kicking a dead horse, it would be kicking a skeleton of a horse with pointing out how they did not plan their new trilogy of Star Wars movies, which baffles me to this day. But it's a tremendous indication of a problem that's become prolific in speculative fiction adaptations since then. We have seen especially streamers just not plan their adaptations, their stories, and take them season by season, which has been a catastrophe time and time again. Now, I actually posted a video on my Instagram story saying this. I just got done recording this little rant for tomorrow's Fantasy News about how I cannot fathom, comprehend, understand how studios are willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes $100 million an episode into adapting a fantasy epic. And they can't give their writers an extra year of prep time to get like multiple seasons of scripting done to make sure they're actually gonna be able to tell a really damn good story. I can't process that even. I get they want quick return on their money. I get they have to make shareholders happy and show progress and stuff, but it's just so bizarre to me that they'd be that reckless with that much money, right? Like, plan ahead. There's gotta be an answer. Is it really just, hey, we need to make a number go up stonk faster? What? And I thought that would be an issue that Star Wars would never be able to recover from. There would never be a purposeful, motivated story within Star Wars that felt like not only was it able to evolve and change the perspective on the original series, but actually serve a purpose and reflection to our real world that doesn't feel stupidly ham-fisted and grossly incompetent in its messaging. And I was proven completely wrong when it comes to Andor.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm. Kindness, kinship. Love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, There's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
Debatably the best piece of Star Wars media we have gotten in over 40, 50 years now. I'm not trying to say Andor is better than Empire Strikes Back, but I'm saying you can actually have a valid conversation talking about the quality of this, what it was able to do for the universe, and the impact of the original trilogy. I actually find it's a bit reductive a lot of the time to compare two pieces of media from vastly different eras of entertainment, especially in the visual movie show formats, not only because of technological restrictions, but a lot of the politics or messaging that they were trying to make at the time can drastically evolve and change and be reinterpreted, and newer generations can miss some of the more nuanced, poignant points that are hidden within, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's worth a whole video on its own, and if I was going to compare Andor and, let's say, Empire Strikes Back, it would require a whole video because there's actually amazingly enough meat there to dig into. My God, I'm happy to say that. And so not only did I love this show, but now it is such a wonderful example of what I have been screaming for weeks here on the channel, started before I even watched the show, of how if yes, you have the combination of a big budget, which don't get me wrong, does help, and Andor did have, but also a completed script in the hands of a visionary who has purpose in mind, the end results can be a story that people actually give a shit about for decades, right? Not just the immediate season or two where after it's over, they're like, that might have been entertaining, but I'm done with it now. But even going in one level, the amount that Andor actually changes within universe and recontextualizes for Star Wars is just as important because, well, I may be someone who's kind of Star Wars for a while, I've kept up with the general stories. I think the only media from Star Wars I have not gotten through would be Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. I don't think I did the most recent season of The Mandalorian as well, and I definitely haven't kept up with the books, but pretty much everything else aside from that I have consumed. And the only reason I never made videos about it, positive or negative, was I just didn't have much to say. So imagine my surprise when after getting into like 3 or 4 episodes into Andor, I realized I was not only emotionally invested, but mentally stimulated by it and caring about Star Wars. Let's get into why. And I want to actually emphasize a point there I made. Let Andor cook. See this little egg sizzling in a pan here? I wanted this to be like my first real point I got into. The first few episodes are good, but once we get into like episodes 4 and 5 of season 1, it becomes great. And season 2 has the same, give it time, it's putting in legwork, and we'll get there. That's necessary for this story to work. So Andor's never bad, but it gets great around episodes like 4 and 5 for both seasons because it's cooking. It doesn't have the same problem that so many pieces of Star Wars media, show or movie have had in recent years, where they don't trust your attention span or your willingness to pay attention beyond just like, go, 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 more scenes, action, lightsaber. And it's setting up political intrigue, and it's actually letting you sit and marinate with the ideas and setting it's developing. I was shocked when we get to a prison plotline in season 1, and there are multiple scenes that don't necessarily shove the story along. They aren't there to make you think about anything new with the characters, and instead, they are inviting you, Andor as a show is inviting you to feel something. Watch these characters in this prison go through the same routine again and again and suffer, so you have time to become comfortable in this uncomfortable setting. Realize that this is a high price to pay and is going to have tremendous psychological impact on the titular character of Cassian Andor. I'd actually make the case that this is one of the few things I will actually point at versus movie and show Empire Strikes Back and Andor. This is the best structured piece of Star Wars media potentially ever. How the momentum of this story slowly builds to the climaxes of season 1 and the mid-season climax of season 2 is like painful. And then there's this incredible decision where, yes, season 2 has like a late mid-season climax, and then the rest of the show is actually just letting you sit in the horrific, awful thing you just watched. And it's going to take you into Rogue One. It's a direct slide. You go from the ending of season 2 into this movie, and because of that, I actually think Andor, despite the flaws that the movie absolutely still does has, kind of improves Rogue One. Because one of my biggest issues with Rogue One is that from go just felt like the climax of something, and there's not much time to really start caring about the characters. I still don't care about Jyn Erso that much, but you can bet your ass I care about Andor a whole lot, because we've had 2 seasons of actual character work and evolution, and understand what he's losing at the end of that movie, what he's actually sacrificing beyond just platitudes of like, we're a rebellion. We are a rebel. All that to say, larger point, let them write it out. East Side write it out. West Side write it out. Everybody write it out. And there's the surface level observations as well that I think are pretty clear signs that Andor is something pretty big and different. Like, there's not a lightsaber. No lightsaber is even drawn or hits another lightsaber. Great choice, because this actually bleeds into the next like narrative point I want to make. For so long, we've been hearing creative voices that are in charge of the direction that Star Wars is going to go into say that this is a bigger universe than just Skywalker. We're going to push this beyond the legacy of Skywalkers, and they've never actually followed through on that. So many of the projects have relied on just falling back into the name of Skywalker, hoping that that will add in the emotional oomph to make you care and keep watching. Andor is the first project I have seen from them that does not touch that name. It is not about that. This is about the on-the-ground rebellion and how much they bled to actually make A New Hope possible. And yes, I'm including Rogue One in the overall story because it truly is the ending of Andor. I actually, and I've heard this from so many people, I did the same thing. I finished season 2 and I turned on Rogue One immediately, because that's just the transition. And this gets into something I have heard as a criticism of Andor, and I actually want to say you are absolutely not wrong if this is your criticism of Andor and you don't want to watch it for it. I have heard people say, look, this is essentially an R-rated show. There are depictions of sexual assault and genocide happening. It's a rough watch, and if you as an individual are just someone who's like, hey, I like Star Wars for escapism and fun time, and this is not my cup of tea, this is not what I come to Star Wars for, fair. I'm not gonna say you're wrong, and that is a totally valid criticism to have, but I absolutely loved it. Because, let's be honest, even in the original trilogy, the Rebels do some messed up stuff. Yes, the Empire blew up a planet. That's bad. And they do even like more sick and twisted stuff in some ways in Andor, because obviously while blowing up a planet like kills more people, the personal angles of what some of the characters within Andor actually do feel more vile, right? It's like when you hear a number of like people dying, it just becomes a statistic. Whereas if you're watching individuals suffer and die at the hands of the Empire, you end up hating them more, right? The personal connection, basic empathy that numbers can't really get across. And the Rebels also blow up 2 Death Stars that are full of like, you know, maintenance crews and stuff. They had every right to do it. War is hell, and they needed to do it. But there's all this upbeat, happy music, and it's like, yay, tens of thousands of people who were pressed into service for the Empire. Maybe not necessarily all of them even wanted to do it, as we saw with Finn, have died. Woo. This is taking the lens of that, and for especially the first season, emphasizing it in the narrative. There is a line from a rebel where someone points out people will suffer, and the response from a person who's helping the rebellion get together is, that's the plan. This is going to be worse, and we need people to understand how awful the Empire is. But it goes far deeper than that. This show isn't just about highlighting how good guys occasionally have to do bad, and not all bad guys are necessarily heartless and evil. There is an exploration of how the actual Empire seized control, how it went from Palpatine yelling in the Senate that he's becoming the Supreme Chancellor to basically the Senate's power being evaporated. And that comes from the Mon Mothma plotline, which when it started was like, I don't care. I'm not going to care about these people. I don't care about Mon Mothma's family. And God, was I wrong. The weight of sacrifice is a theme that each rebellious character must endure. What it truly means to bleed for a cause. And Mon Mothma is someone who obviously is a part of the system, believed in the system, except they're learning, oh, I can't just like half-ass push against it. We need to go all in. We need to work with criminals. We need to sacrifice even on the most personal level possible, because losing something that holds my heart in the long run will free this galaxy. And so might free this galaxy, to actually be more accurate. And so you do what must be done, no matter how painful it is. And I actually almost teared up with a couple of Mon Mothma scenes. And then there's things like making a grandiose political speech and acknowledging that side did happen. But beyond that, how do you get out? After you've done this, how are you not arrested and shot? What has to be sacrificed to achieve that? Who can you actually trust? And each of these angles benefit from it actually being completely written out. Things are set up in episode 1 that pay off in the final episodes as emotional catharsis, not necessarily of the good kind. A lot of people hear catharsis and they assume all positive. Catharsis can be negative. It's just a release, right? And so watching the end of Andor, actually seeing it go into Rogue One, which I'm going to acknowledge that Andor lives because we've all seen Rogue One and this is a prequel to it, so I'm sorry. That's not a spoiler. I'm going to go ahead and just put that here. This is not an alternate universe thing in Star Wars for the first time ever. But you see him like walking off to start this, and what should feel like a heroic moment of like, we're going to do the final thing to acknowledge, actually becomes, oh. And I think that's what drives people to watch Rogue One right away, because there's this subterfuge that Andor is desperate to discover, this energy plan from the Emperor, but what's he actually trying to do with all this energy? And, you know, people are left and right dying and murdering each other to cover up this valuable information that it cannot get out, that this information has gotten out. And all of that leads to something that we know ends in tragedy, but then transitions to hope. All of their bleeding leads into our heroes of the original trilogy without having to say the name Skywalker. And to me, that is a more effective use of the Skywalker legacy than having Darth Vader show up and swing a lightsaber around, or having Luke be seen as a baby. That doesn't do anything for me as a viewer. But recontextualizing the bloodshed that had to happen so that R2 could end up on Tatooine and deliver these plans to Obi-Wan, that is a useful use of the Star Wars legacy even as a whole. And I feel like it's what Rogue One kind of wanted to do, but it was just so rushed it failed to. But I want to be clear, none of that has addressed my actual favorite angle to Andor yet, because the best thing Andor did, in my opinion, was balance. A extreme imbalance in how the Empire has been presented to us as viewers for a long time now. Even, in my opinion, in the original trilogy. And I'm signifying it here by the up, up, down arrows. I'm gonna explain this philosophy real quick. You see, in the original trilogy, the Empire felt like a big-ass threat. They were a bit too faceless, though, and just blanketly evil. There wasn't much of a challenge to viewers to ever be like, oh, I understand the motivations of Grand Moff Tarkin. He's just bad. He's a bad man who believes in the Sith Lord Emperor, so bad. Here, there are multiple plot lines within Andor to make you understand not only how someone can end up hating the rebellion, but why they can buy into an order, something that promises safety in the galaxy, and anyone who goes against it is just into chaos. They want chaos and freedom from only themselves. This is progress. This is order. They tried to assassinate our Emperor. The Jedis were traitors. They are bad. Andor's narrative actually pays so much attention to two characters individual, I'm gonna call them Evil Handmaid's Tale and Bad Kyle MacLachlan, going down two different trajectories throughout this show. One is an individual who is driven by emotion, but is absolutely dedicated to this ideology until they become challenged a lot, while the other represents blind devotion. And the endings these two come to fit their arcs perfectly. I will not spoil it, but I will say especially the final shots of Evil Handmaid's Tale were like chillingly good. With how bad we know that situation is from a previous storyline, it's bone chilling seeing where they end up and watching this person have the illusion of the Empire shatter around them, but it's too late and they already made the wrong decisions. Oh my God, consequences for actions. I can't believe it. But the second up here is we lift up from those humanized people who we get how they end up into the Imperial doctrine, and we see those who are lying to them. We see those that are trying to plan to build a Death Star, monsters who actually just crave power, and those higher order people crush those beneath them uncaringly, and they present it as if those individuals failed, which is a very true to world issue within organizations like this. And a lot of this final falling apart, I'm not going to spoil what it is, but let's just call it Star Wars's. And I'm going to censor that because I think YouTube will demonetize me for it. And also, it might be too much of a spoiler. So if you know, you know. And if you don't know, you don't know. And committing an act on that level of brutality is either going to irreparably break your humanity or it's going to break you. And we see both ends play out, except you're also used up and what you've needed to do is done. And if they throw you away, they can just say, well, this happening was your fault and you screwed up and all this, nah, I didn't make any mistakes. And this continues up the chain of command, making complete sense, reminding me of like shows like Chernobyl, where they're just constantly trying to pass the buck. It's never my fault. It's always the next guy. But then there is the oh so important final down arrow, which is the flaws that inherently come with this. And there is a line in Andor that is repeated and so true, where tyranny, I can't remember the exact, I'm paraphrasing, but tyranny requires constant effort and constant manipulation and lies to maintain. It is not something that people, at least in the presentation of this show, and hopefully in the real world, willingly believe in, without so much effort trying to force and twist their minds to get in line. People want to be free, people want to be empathetic, and people want to do good. And so this constant pressure and pushback reaches breaking points, and that results in the escalation that the Empire relies on to justify them building these super weapons and crushing the Senate. But at the same time, the more they do it, the more the rebellion gets fed. People break free. People realize what's actually going on. Real world parallels with poignancy. Oh my God. And I'm not trying to get super into modern politics. I don't want this to descend into a just trash comment section, but we've all also seen the Dr. Seuss story where they didn't come for me, so I just ignored them. And there's even a scene in this show where a senator is being dragged out after his people are massacred, and he's screaming, they're gonna come for you next. But few listen. Not enough listen until it's kind of too late, but not enough because, well, Luke Skywalker. For all of those reasons, and one more, I am about to give you a glowing final rating of Andor, but the last bit I want to talk about is this blocking. I get that VFX are spectacular. They can awe you and make you go, but so many of the recent Star Wars movies have overly relied on that. They just want to show you something visually striking, and even when Rogue One first came out, I kind of fell into it. Like when they first showed the new scope and scale of the Death Star, I went, ah, but upon rewatch, that loses its charm. What has way more value and lasts within media is properly planning out blocking and putting impact, emphasis in your scenes by the smallest decisions. You don't need to show me a great big gargantuan weapon or a lightsaber, but if you have two prisoners in one of the best block scenes I've seen in years, trying to convince each other to make an escape after learning horrific truths, and they're going back and forth, and there's a timer coming down, and the way they move actually reflects their minds and their realizations. This is executed perfectly. It is, I don't say this too often, it's a perfect scene. It's not nothing but perfect scenes. I have criticisms of Andor. Sometimes the Empire is just stupid, and the good guys get too lucky. The Empire is just unable to deploy troops as they should, but you know, plot things need to happen and whatever. I can suspend my disbelief. It's not perfect. But in these moments, you make up for that, because I'm then seeing the effort from the artists behind your project, and I am awed by them. So these little issues of maybe the Empire is just too sloppy, not in my head. What's in my head is how Andy Serkis and Cassian Andor actor of the name on screen now, gave performances that I actually felt like I was watching an actor care, trying to give a career-defining performance because they read the script and they believed in it too. And this extends to the visual language of the show. So many reflected shots, layers upon layers of how rebellions have to stay separated and kind of work against each other at times. But when it comes down to the key moment, are they going to unify in the cause? Like, it's so thought out. This show is meticulous to me, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Hot damn, dude. Woo! 0.5 is just because Andy Serkis is in it and I f***ing love that guy. But this takes me to the million-dollar question. Why? Why, Disney? Why has it taken this long for you to have the patience to allow a project to fully cook? Why have we had to deal with half-baked villains who are willing to throw their entire order under the bus because they're mad about something? Why have there been no heroes that have interesting, believable development and flaws? Why have there been entire plot lines dropped? Why was there a trilogy of movies released that was so bad that your now half-baked standalones fail to even make substantial profit? Could you imagine the power this franchise would still have if you had just had the patience to construct interesting stories from go? It doesn't even need to be R-rated dark stuff. It just needs to have purpose. Star Wars has been purposeless for 20 years, and this pisses me off because we can see the potential. We could see finally what Star Wars in 2025 had the potential of being, but we've spent 20 years shitting the bed. For no reason other than just greed. Just, hey, we got this, let's turn it around fast, upward, stonk good. When I put out that Instagram story, 2 different people who worked in the industry in various different parts reached out to me and responded to it saying, just greed, just dumb greed. Dumb greed where people want to put out something fast. They want to do something quick and get a return and market and sell toys and have new things on the shelves so that, you know, people buy it. Let's put out the toy before the movie's even out. You don't care. Nothing matters. F you, art. ChatGPT might be the final nail in the coffin of this era of art, but the grave was dug decades ago.